Cool. Let's get started. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another ISSessions. I guess just really briefly to go over what we have planned for you. We're going to kick it off with, I guess me, but after that, the news roundup by Adam and Yusuf, familiar faces. Directly after that, I'll be going into a project end, kind of talking about my experience or my personal experience with setting up a home lab on an enterprise server. And then after that, we'll take a short break and come back with John Simpson, who he's going to give his, I guess it's yearly at this point, his yearly presentation on the wonderful world of information security to give people some perspective on what it's like to work in InfoSec. And I think it's one of my favorite talks, to be honest. I love it. So yeah, without further ado, pass it over to Adam and Yusuf with the news roundup. Adam, you have control, right?
Yes, I do.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining again for the news segment with myself and Yusuf. So for the first news story, so AI security, this project aims to spot attacks against critical systems before they happen. So MITRE and 12 other companies and academic institutions recently released a new framework to map attacks, particularly against AI and machine learning systems. And they're calling it the Adversarial Machine Learning Threat Matrix. For those of you that don't know, MITRE is a US-based nonprofit that is known for their attack framework. It's commonly referenced to model existing cyber attacks against IT infrastructure, and also used to track techniques used by APTs. So that's where the references commonly come from. The new framework that's being introduced is supposed to organize and catalog known techniques against machine learning systems. It's a way to give a common language to describe and classify vulnerabilities and tactics applicable to machine learning systems in particular, because there's different attacks that that machine learning kind of used against machine learning systems. The article also points out that companies such as Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Tesla have all seen machine learning systems being attacked in recent years, and they went ahead and documented it within this framework to kind of start providing some data and use cases. And the project is available on GitHub. So if you're interested, you can go ahead and check it out.
Cool. Thanks, Adam. So this one isn't really I guess a huge security story, but it's kind of interesting to see something like this. So essentially, this person who works at UFT as the Chief Information Security Officer, his name is Straley, and he was appointed to a expert panel that was created by the Ontario government. The panel is called the Broader Public Sector Cybersecurity Expert Panel, and its goal is to address pressing challenges in cybersecurity, provide feedback on provincial government's existing efforts that help out with ongoing investigations, and create a comprehensive security strategy. So it's cool to kind of see something like this, and especially in a familiar place in UFT. The panel is led by a person named Robert Wong, who is the Executive VP and Chief Information Officer at Toronto Hydro, and he is also an alumni of UFT. So it's interesting to see these people coming out of UFT participating in this panel. Another goal is to help prevent events that result in the loss of sensitive personal and health data, sabotaging organizations' operations, and forced payment of ransom to regain data access. The article goes into talk about a little bit about what he plans to do and a couple of his main goals, and he wants to focus on de-incentivizing attacks, as well as dealing with the economic struggles of maintaining security within organizations. So it's cool to kind of see that Ontario has something like this, despite all the, I guess you could say, weak stances that Canada takes within security, within online security. So it's nice to see this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to see someone within the government kind of being able to advocate for cybersecurity and kind of educate as well. I'm sure that will be probably part of his role as well.
100%.
So for the next story, security researchers have found a rat or a remote access Trojan called T-Rat that has been advertised on Russian sites for the low price of $45. Uh, this rat and ones like it are using Telegram to remotely control infected machines. Beforehand, Twitter was a popular option for a while. The reason for these services being used is because they make it harder for defenders to be able to identify connections, because using sites like Twitter and Telegram, it appears on the network more as regular user behavior rather than something suspicious from like a random URL. So that's why rats have kind of been moving towards those services. Uh, this malware, TRAT in particular, offers quite a few capabilities, such as taking a screenshot of the desktop, and also an interesting one is detecting the wallet addresses when they're being copied into the user's clipboard. And the behavior is when this occurs, or when it thinks a user entered in or copied a crypto wallet to their clipboard, then they can go ahead and change that address to be the attacker's wallet. So when they're sending cryptocurrencies to another person, they can they'll end up sending it to the attacker's wallet if they're not careful. So kind of interesting. Actually, I think at B-Sides, someone demoed something similar to this. And there have been regular uploads of TRAT samples to VirusTotal.
Cool. So obviously Trump's always in the news. Every day there's something new. But this one, I'm gonna combine it with a another article that I saw on Trump's, I guess you could say, social media use, web use, whatever the case may be. So hackers took control of Trump's 2020 campaign site. It was a journalist by the name of Gabriel Lorenzo. I'm not going to attempt to say his last name because I'll butcher it. And he discovered this while researching for a climate change article. He then tweeted about it, and he tweeted the picture that you see in this slide right here. And if you can see like if you can look and you can see that a bunch of the messages that are said are against Trump, obviously. And they claim to have accessed multiple or compromised multiple devices, which which gave them full access to internal and secret conversations of the Trump and Trump relatives. So this just goes to show a bunch of weak security within the Trump organization, even though you would think that he would have a bunch of advisors helping him out with this kind of stuff. The other article I wanted to also point out was the Twitter article leading to his Twitter being hacked just a couple weeks ago, stating that his password was MAGA 2020 and he did not have two-factor authentication enabled. So sad to see, but sad reality. This was also interesting to see because of the cryptocurrency aspect to it. So the at the bottom of the page, after the attackers gave out all their messages, they posted two addresses for Monero, which is a cryptocurrency, service. And what this would allow you to do is if you go to those addresses, and you would be able to, I guess, buy access to the classified data that they claim to have. However, law enforcement stated that attackers had zero access to any classified data, and that their statement that they had access to classified data has yet to be validated by anybody.
It's interesting that they use Monero, since Monero has some like anonymization kind of capabilities compared to Bitcoin, which is
Right.
kind of why cyber criminals like using Monero aside from Bitcoin. But
Makes
Bitcoin
sense.
has a lot more popularity compared to Monero. So
Interesting.
kind of cool. So next up, so this is MobileIron's enterprise MDM servers under attack from DDoS gangs and nation states. MDM stands for Mobile Device Management. You can think of it as Active Directory group policy, but targeted at mobile devices, though that's not really true anymore since they commonly support Mac OS and Windows. But like I said, primarily they're focused on mobile, like phones. So companies use MDM solutions to secure company phones or support bring your own device policies where mobile app management is not possible. Some common capabilities of a tool like this are like configuring remote device wipe, ensuring the phone has a passcode to unlock, and also distributing and installing internal apps remotely. So like companies might have internal apps that are only available to employees and they'll have their own app store, or in some cases they might have the ability to actually push and remotely install applications on users' phones. So a security researcher discovered 3 major security bugs in MobileIron's core product, which is an on-premise application instead of a SaaS. So it's hosted on a company's in a company's environment. The 3 vulnerabilities are remote code execution, arbitrary file reading, and authentication bypass. So the vendor has released a patch in July without the vulnerability details being published at that time. However, in September, the same researcher, used the bugs that he discovered earlier to pivot into Facebook's internal network as part of their bug bounty. And he actually earned some money for it, which is great. And after that bug bounty, he released the details of the vulnerabilities that he discovered on his blog. Since then, other researchers have created and released a proof of concept exploit on GitHub, out of all places, for the most dangerous remote code vulnerability. Naturally, attackers such as APTs started using the exploit in their attacks, and it has since been listed as one of the top 25 vulnerabilities used by Chinese state hackers by the NSA. And this is a great example of the typical vulnerability lifecycle. So you have discovery, you have proof of concept code, then you have weaponization, then you have exploitation.
Very interesting. I like how you mentioned the bug bounty, which I will get into later.
Absolutely.
Cool. So this one is, I guess, more can be more relatable to us as Facebook users if you have Facebook or if you use it. But essentially, scammers have, quote, hatched a new way to bypass two-factor authentication. You'll later see that they're not really bypassing it, but essentially, you would get a fraudulent copyright infringement notice. And then through that process, they would tell you that you have 24 hours before your account is completely deactivated. And within those 24 hours, you have to appeal. To go through that appeal process, you are asked to enter both steps of your two-factor authentication. And so that gives them full access to your account, and then they can later use it to sell or to get into your account, whether that be for Facebook or for any other thing that uses that same password, which is why you don't use the same password. What's interesting to note here is through their phishing scam, they were able to generate a legit SSL certificate because of the cloud instance that they were running it on. And the article goes to talk about, is two-factor authentication broken? Which is interesting because I guess this could be easily stopped just by simply looking at, I guess, the URL link. That'll tell you a lot about the how valid a link that you're in is, how valid it is. Also, I don't think Facebook would ever send something like that asking you to place both two steps of your two-factor authentication. So it's kind of interesting that people actually fall for this, but it's normal, considering if you don't have that kind of knowledge. What's also cool is, I want to get this right, um, is the certificate. So I'm going to quote this from the article. The certificate's validity started midnight today, and the scam email we received arrived at 1:53 UTC, which is early evening in the west coast of America and late evening on the east coast. As you can see, cyber crooks move fast. So just I guess, puts things into perspective as to how quickly things move. And yeah, so it's interesting, but just, I guess, keep your eyes open when receiving anything like this, because I feel like we've all received some sort of phishing email within the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it's kind of interesting how they use the urgency as a good way to, as a way to like the sense of urgency was quite effective, right? It's like you have to
100%.
do an action now. There's that kind of panic.
It doesn't give you
And
that time to think.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you already fell for it, as long as they just anticipate the 2FA token, I guess like it's a good way of like once that trust is already earned, getting that 2FA token, I guess it's just a second step that they just need to account for.
100%.
Kind of interesting. So now another Krebs on security article. Every company, I like this quote, every company gets penetration tested, whether or not they pay someone for the pleasure. So based on the article, gaining initial access is the easy part. And it's actually been a bit of become quite a commodity on dark forums. The challenge seems to be as to how to monetize the breach. And ransomware has been a common vector to monetize attacks. Um, this article kind of goes over, kind of mentions how some ransomware crews, they'll actually purchase initial access in bulk, and then they'll hire people to identify the victims and then escalate their access, within that environment. And then, sorry, my mic's dying a little bit. But yeah, they'll escalate privileges within that environment, and then that way they can be more effective at when they do when they do start encrypting everything, they can go ahead and hit the entire organization instead of just a random computer. So they're being a lot more selective with who they target.
Cool. So back to the whole bug bounty thing. So this one's kind of interesting, as it talks about the pandemic and its effect on reshaping the bug bounty landscape. If you don't know what bug bounties are, think of it as bounty hunters. Bounty hunters are people who work as normal citizens to find criminals, and bring them into the police. Bug bounty is kind of the same concept, except it's in an online environment. Um, you could say ethical hackers go around looking for bugs and report them to the organization. If that organization has a bug bounty program, they will then get some sort of fee in return for, you could say, their service. Um, so this article talks about how the pandemic, and due to everything being online and everyone doing everything from home, it's giving organizations big pushes to A, improve their entire security infrastructure, and B, to try and adopt programs such as bug bounty programs to help within their organizations. Now, it's interesting because you look at a tool like Zoom, and because of the pandemic, they did not expect to have the huge uproar and the need for their service, but that's what happened. And you could say they weren't ready for it, but they needed to be, and that's what the pandemic brought on. So it's cool to see how, I guess, something so bad as COVID has brought into certain things, and it's brought, as the article states, brought a lot of positive changes to security infrastructures. With the increase of everything being online, there's obviously an increase in attacks, and thus there needs to be an increase in, you could say, just any sort of service that's fights against those, and bug bounty programs are really cool. So if bug bounty programs are something you like and enjoy and actually consider doing, I really recommend looking at this article because there's two really great people, Lindsay O'Donnell Welch and Cassie Ellis, talk about bug bounty programs and the effect of the pandemic on them and just bug bounty programs in general.
It's great to see that companies are a lot more receptive of people reporting vulnerabilities and people getting paid for finding vulnerabilities.
Absolutely.
So next, New York regulator faults Twitter for lax security measures prior to big account breach. So we got more details regarding the Twitter hack and the Twitter hack. So to recap, over the summer, many high-profile Twitter accounts were compromised to post a crypto scam with a tweet that earned about 100,000 bitcoins before being shut down. So since then, 2 teens and 1 adult have been arrested in connection to the attack. And in this article, we get more details as to how they managed to break into Twitter to gain access to the internal tools. So it turns out that the attackers were able to impersonate Twitter's IT department employees over the phone. So their lure was convincing employees that there was some issue with the VPN. And this is how they were able to trick employees into entering their credentials into a fake VPN login site. So kind of like a simple way of phishing, I guess. So the article mentions that Twitter has increased security controls since the incident, and they have also hired a CISO after the breach for the first time.
Cool. So with the pandemic, obviously more people are playing games and video games. So there's this cool game called Among Us, if you know it. If you don't know it, well, that's okay. But
It means you're
essentially
not cool.
Thank you, Kurt. But yeah, it means you're not cool. But I know my friends, sorry, I'm like getting sidetracked. My friends really tried to get me to play this game, but I have yet to play it. But I know of it, so I'm cool.
It's a trap.
Anyway.
Many friendships were ruined.
Yes, I've heard that one too, so maybe not. But essentially, what's happened is this game run by a company called Inner Sloth. It's actually only run by 3 people. So it was released 2 years ago, but because of the pandemic, it's increased tremendously in popularity. In fact, it has almost 5.3 million downloads on Google Play alone. So it's kind of cool to see something like that increase. However, with that, just like I mentioned before, they were unprepared for certain activities. And what happened over the past couple of weeks is they would get certain games, and in fact, almost all games would get spammed by bots that would be sending out messages. They're promoting messages, and what ends up happening is they released a server update that essentially kicks good and bad actors out of the game, and that's an attempt to identify the bad actors. But with that, obviously the update isn't as sophisticated as it needs to be to point out the bad actors. So that's where the good actors get kicked out as well. So just the normal players who are just trying to have a good time end up getting kicked out of some games. It's gotten so bad that a bunch of people have gone on social media and say, one person said, I have tried 40 plus games, not a single one wasn't hacked within 10 to 30 seconds. So it's sad to see, but it's what you get with kind of small games or small organizations like this, and a increase in popularity for a service, a game, or something like that. The messages that were being promoted by these bots were promoting this dude, man, fake name, I don't know what it is, his YouTube channel and Discord server. The name is Eric Loris, and he was also promoting Trump 2020 messages. So yeah.
I mean, Among Us has been like a small indie title, so it's not surprising that they may have had like a small team working on the app. Like you mentioned, there was 3 people involved. So they kind of just became popular like overnight. And good on them because they made a fun game. But they're kind of have to scramble quick and upgrade their security to support the large user base that kind of suddenly hit their platform. Next, the U.S. Department of Justice has unsealed charges against what it believes are 6 members of the crew Sandworm. So Sandworm attacks, some of Sandworm's attacks have been destructive attacks against Ukraine's electricity grid in 2015-16, destructive attacks against the Ukrainian government agencies in 2016, NotPetya in 2017, and others. So it looks like this crew has been quite busy for a few years now, and kind of doing part of some very disruptive attacks. So the charges are against members of the Russian GRU military intelligence unit. So yeah, or kind of public, the U.S. seems to more publicly kind of disclose who they think are attacking, kind of are committing cyber crime. So
I'll speed through this one because it's a little bit over my head, and 2 because we're running out of time. But essentially, PlayStation, because the PlayStation is being released soon, I thought it would be good to include this. So PlayStation released an update that would essentially record voice chats. What is happening is that created a bunch of invasion of privacy backlash from the community, the PlayStation community, and the only reason they did this, as the article states, is to create safer environments for people to play in. They later clarified that they were only allowing users to record at their discretion, and it would only record 20 seconds of the main conversation that happened and 10 seconds before and after for them to submit a claim of bullying or something like that the user felt while playing during the game. So it's not as big of a deal as a lot of people thought. Many people thought they would be recording entire chats, which would be an invasion of privacy.
So next up, a security DevOps engineer discovered a way to track users using Waze. So Waze paid out a bug bounty of $1,300 back in January 2020. They have since patched the vulnerability, and in August, the researcher publicly disclosed what he discovered. So the way he was able to identify and track users through the platform was Waze offers a web browser, and by looking at the request made by his web browser to Waze, he was able to pull map data in JSON. And the Waze APIs offers nearby users' GPS location within a certain region, and it includes their usernames that are not it doesn't include their usernames, but instead an ID is shown. However, the ID is not periodically changed. Therefore, it's not possible to track users' location over a long period of time. So taking this a step further, anytime a user makes a report of, say, like construction along their journey or something, their username is listed, and also their ID is available with that post. So that's how they're able to de-anonymize a user and track them over extended periods of time. Kind of a clever way of kind of tracking back that information. Then for our last story.
So this is the one that's a little bit over my head, I'm sorry. But essentially, there's this vulnerability CVE 2020-15157, and it is essentially a bug related to a software called Container, which manages the container lifecycle of a host. And it could be used to expose the host registry or user credentials. What you would do to exploit this vulnerability is build a dedicated container designed to steal hosts' tokens. And then through social engineering tactics or phishing scams or scandals, you could convince users to access that container through container. And this person named Brad Giesman at Darkman, the researcher who discovered this vulnerability, called it container drip. He also put a proof of concept together, which then shortly after Container patched this vulnerability, and they listed it as a medium severity vulnerability.
All right, cool. So that's everything. This last article is just a bit of an announcement that Docker scan is available. So kind of like ties in with the last article that we mentioned. And then that's a new segment. So back to you, Kurt.
Kurt, you there? We can't hear you if you're talking.
God damn it, I was muted. Okay, thanks for the news, guys. If you guys are, if you're still interested in, well, thanks for letting me know at least. I wasn't talking for 5 minutes.
I got you, bro.
Thank you. If you guys are interested in going to those news articles, we'll have them posted tonight on the Discord. So stay tuned for that. Up next is my section, project done by me. I called it Home Lab Headache. While I've been at Sheridan, I've seen a lot of people, or heard a lot of people, or people ask me questions about home labs and like how do they get started, and what should they buy, or they're just generally curious about that whole type of thing. And people even ask me to try to do a workshop on home labs, and I'm always hesitant because there's so many different types of hardware, and especially with this COVID, we're relying on people having the same setups. It's kind of impossible if you're just talking about hardware. So instead, I would go over my personal experience with setting up a home lab. But before I dive into that, I just want to quickly clarify what a home lab is. I think when people think of home lab, especially when you're talking about information technology, they think of a giant rack full of enterprise stuff that they got off Kijiji or whatever, that with Cisco switches and everything. But to be honest, that's like that's an extreme, and that's mostly like a hobbyist type thing, I believe. Like most people's home labs, or most people in this program, I think everybody in this program actually has already had a home lab, and that's just generally like VMware Workstation. A home lab, from my view, is just at least from my understanding, is an environment that you use to test and learn, right? So all your assignments you've done, if they used a virtual machine, or just like you installed something to just test some things, like that's a home lab, right? So these are just two different extremes pretty much. But for my situation, I guess like 3.5 years ago, I thought a home lab meant having a rack and a bunch of crazy enterprise technology. So when I wanted to go out and build a home lab, I'm like, okay, let's go buy an enterprise server, right? So I did some research, found some articles and guides or whatever on what to buy. So I guess it's been mid 2017. I went out and bought it was like about $300 US, so about 400 Canadian dollars. I bought a decent, what I thought was a good deal at the time. It's the 1U chassis, which is the smallest you can get. Kind of now that I know that, you kind of want to get more than 1U because it's pretty cramped. But it works for me. So it's a 1U chassis, dual Xeons. So two of them together, 16 cores, 3 threads. Clock's pretty low at 2 gigahertz. I think they turbo a little bit higher. 64 gigs of RAM, and a no-name motherboard, which is extremely annoying. I know I actually figured out what motherboard it was, but it's very hard to find BIOS updates for BIOS firmware for something that's kind of mysterious. A couple things to note: if you are going to go out and buy an old enterprise server, be very careful. Because I feel like a lot of the prices people are trying to sell them for are absurd. As I said, I bought this for 400 Canadian dollars like 3.5 years ago. And I see people trying to sell things like, or that are similar to this or worse, for like $1,000. And be careful with old hardware. Just because something has 2 Xeons in it doesn't mean anything. A Xeon, there's many different architectures, and like buying a Xeon, I would pay $0 for a Xeon 2008 and earlier. Like that's basically You have to give that to me, and even then, that's kind of like garbage that I'm holding on to because just the inefficiencies of that hardware. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you are going to go out and buy this old hardware. Yeah, and we'll get into the electricity as well. So just a couple things I want to note because they're important later on. There's some SATA connections here and a SAS connector. They're both controlled by separate controllers, which is useful. You have 4 hard drive bays. There's no I don't know what they're called, quick release slots, whatever they're called, modules. It's fine for me because I just throw hard drives in there. I don't need to worry too much about it. Hot swap bays. There you go. Thank you, CK. Here's a NIC, or is it a NIC or network interface card? It might not be. I'll explain that later. We have a PCIe slot on a riser here. I only really have one that's usable. There's another one, but it's practically unusable. There's I think it's either SPF, SFP. It's SFP. I forget what it stands for. Basically, these are you put a module in here that has like fiber. They also have modules for Ethernet. Retail price of these modules is like hundreds of dollars, but I think you can find them on eBay for 30 to 50. And then a VGA to connect to a monitor and install my hypervisor. So yeah, that's what I bought for $300. Sorry, 400 Canadian dollars. As CK said, these things are extremely loud. I didn't realize how loud these were. Like I've been in a lot of server rooms before I bought this, but there's a difference between going to a server room and something's really loud and coming home and hearing this in your room. So I don't know if this will come through, but I can't even hear it. I don't know. Can you guys hear it? Anyway.
No, I can't hear it.
Okay. Well, just believe me, it's loud.
And me too. Believe me, I heard it. It was loud.
Yeah, and even what he heard, it gets 100% louder than that. Sometimes it gets ridiculous. So just that's something you have to keep in mind. Yeah, I don't want this on 24/7. Yeah, imagine a cheap. Yeah, that's CK said. Imagine a cheap vacuum cleaner running constantly. It's pretty annoying. Even if you put it in your closet, like if the closet's next to your room, like you might still hear it. So like understanding this, like I actually went in after hearing it so loud. I'm like, oh wait, how much electricity is this thing going to cost to just run it idle? And I came out to like, if I just left it idle all month, it would cost me about $30 a month, which I didn't realize at first. I'm like, oh, that's kind of that sucks. So I don't run it 24/7, which leads me to my next thing, which is where I install my hypervisor. I actually put it on, as you see, I'm kind of drilled some holes into the top of this case and put a SSD on top. So I put my hypervisor on that and it boots. So when my server starts up, it boots into my hypervisor, which is ESXi. You'd have these on like a thumb drive and you just boot into it. And then since you never turn the server off, it doesn't really matter. But because I turn it off and turn it on every time I want to use it, it helps a lot to actually have the hypervisor on an SSD. Like literally it saves like 20 minutes. It's ridiculous how long it takes to boot from a USB. So when I first got this, I installed ESSi on SSD. It's ready to go, and I can't connect to the ESXi web interface. There's no, it can't find any network adapters. So I was like, okay, what's going on? Right. So if you remember, I plugged it into here, which I thought was a NIC, but it turns out if you look a little closer, it's IPMI, as CK said in our chat. These are not, you cannot connect to your hypervisor through this. These are used for remote management, basically, of the hardware. So in my case, it'd be remote managing the BIOS, which is, it's nice because you can remotely turn on the computer if it's completely off. Just do it from my desktop. Problem is, I bought this computer thinking it had a NIC and it doesn't, and now I'm stuck with this with this thing that's not super useful and this empty PCI slot and this SFP module. So I can go one or two ways. I can buy a NIC card, shove it in there, or an SFP module. I looked up SFP modules. The problem with SFP modules is that there's so many different types and I wasn't really sure what was compatible, and like the return policies in a lot of them I was looking at just kind of didn't really exist. So I was super skeptical of buying one of those. So I instead bought a cheap $10 NIC, just threw it in this PCI riser at the back. And so I just moved the cable over to my new NIC and it doesn't work. So it was like, what the fuck, right? It turns out is the second sentence here says suitable driver could not be located, which yeah, so my version of ESXi I was installing did not have drivers for this NIC, and actually it had drivers for this NIC, but the version I installed just remove them, like just in that version. So it was like, what the hell? I didn't want to go to an older version. So I was like, okay, is there a way to get around this? Turns out that some guy, some genius, I don't know, made some program, let's see, called ISSexI Customizer, and basically allows me to inject drivers into an ISSexI install, which is dope. So I found the drivers I needed, I injected them into the ISSexI install, reinstalled it, and then booyah, I found the NIC and I was able to get a web client to connect to, which is great. So here it is. This is the web client 1.250, as you see what I set up. So log in, this is kind of what it looks like. Success. Great. I'm into I can start making VMs now, So let's set up storage for my VMs. So, I had 4 hard drive bays, filled them with cheap 1 terabyte hard drives, and log in ESI. Let's build a RAID array. And then I was like, oh wait, find out ESI does not actually support any software RAID functions. In hindsight, this should have been obvious. At the time, I didn't. I was like, oh, my Windows can make raids, software raids, and all the Linux I've used can do software raids. Like, why wouldn't a hypervisor be able to do it? And it just doesn't do it. Usually, you would have a hardware RAID card that all your hard drives would be connected to, and then that would create the raids for you. And ESXi has drivers built in for hardware RAID cards. So I was like, hey, do I want to buy a hardware RAID card? Going down that rabbit hole. If you remember, I put a NIC in my riser slot. Yeah. And I can't actually fit a hardware RAID card now because I have this NIC. So, okay, you have to go buy an SFP module and then replace that. So instead, I was like, hey, maybe there's another way. If you remember, so this is the right side of my motherboard, little diagram. If you remember, I said that there is a SATA connections and a SAS connector, and they are both controlled by separate controllers. So on my SAS connector, I have an adapter so I can connect SATA to it. That's where my ESXi and SSD lie. And then on my SATA connectors, I have my 4 hard disks connected to here. So what I can do basically is I install FreeNAS. I can install FreeNAS on the SSD. That's still connected, right? So ESXi boots up, then I boot up a FreeNAS VM, which is installed on my hypervisor. I can then take these, the controller for these SATA connections. ESXi grabs those and then passes them through to FreeNAS. Okay, so FreeNAS, for those who don't know, usually use it it's used for storage, basically. Like there's many functions. Actually, you can use it as a hypervisor too. Apparently, I didn't know. But yeah, this is what I'm going to use to build my RAID arrays, which is a FreeNAS VM. So to kind of explain it a little better, let's go through the process. ESXi, my hypervisor. I boot into that. It then boots a FreeNAS VM. I then take the SATA controller. I pass it through to FreeNAS. So now FreeNAS sees all 4 of the hard drives, and this is the VM that controls it. It then creates a RAID array. So now I have a data store of all these in a RAID. I then use the ESXi to create a virtual private network between the FreeNAS VM and the hypervisor. And I put MTU 9000 because why not? Whatever. And then on FreeNAS, I create a iSCSI network share to share to the hypervisor. So what is that? How does that work? Well, works great. Actually, the speed is like 100%. There's no problems with the speed or anything. Like it works better than I actually really thought it would. And if you look at this is ESXi right here, it sees the entire share as I have it in RAID 10, so 4 terabytes down to 2. But it sees the entire share, and I can use it and install VMs on it. The speed is absolutely no problem. It works perfectly fine, and I completely avoid having to go with the hardware RAID setup. And for those of you that might be wondering, what if your SSD dies with ESXi and FreeNAS? It doesn't really matter because I have all the settings backed up. So I can just put a new SSD, reinstall both of those, put the settings back, and then it'll just rebuild the RAID array like no problem. And yeah, I guess that's kind of it. I got remote ESXi management working, and I got data redundancy working, which is all I really wanted. Whoa, let me go back. And I didn't want to I had a lot more to talk about, but I didn't want to take the make the project didn't go on too long. There's a lot more networking that I did where I did end up getting an SFP module, and then you're networking that with my router, which I installed custom firmware on and did a bunch of cool stuff with that. Yeah, so thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. I think that if people are interested in, building a home lab, keep in mind that most of the stuff I do on my home lab, I could do on VMware Workstation. So if I think back, I'm like, man, maybe I should have spent money on just upgrading my RAM in my laptop to like 64 gigabytes, and then just the convenience of that to do a lot of my home lab stuff would have been really nice. So you don't really need this, but like the amount I learned from like this old hardware and like how I just like the things I assumed just the way they worked didn't. That's worth some money too, to me, honestly. So yeah, if you guys have questions, I'll read the chat. Why set MTU to 9,000? Yeah, just jumbo frames. Like I believe, I can't remember why. This is a long time ago, but yeah, it made it. There was no problems. I might as well do it, I guess. This is what I kind of found out. Why iSCSI versus NFS? One thing I did leave out was I did try NFS first, and the speeds were horrendous. Like, I mean, I was getting read-write speeds of 0.1 megabytes, and I didn't know why. So I switched to iSCSI, and it fixed everything. I think the problem with NFS was there was too much error correction going on, or like data redundancy things happening between like ESXi and FreeNAS and NFS, or however it was working, and it just was not allowing anything to get written or read in any reasonable time frame. But I'm not 100% sure. I'm not an expert on this. Other than that, yeah. What time is it? 7:56. Okay. We're gonna take a break for 5 minutes, and we'll come back with John Simpson's I call it the wonderful world of information security. So yeah, 5 minutes, guys. Yeah, CK, I think it was like there was no reason not to do it, was what I kind of found out. Like, it's not that it would have made it necessarily like significantly better. It just it's been a while, but yeah, I found out that I might as well if I could, right? Because it's almost a direct connection between ESXi and the iSCSI share. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we can combine our knowledge. I wasn't there for that one.
Yeah, I'm just, some people might be interested in home labs now, and they'll get around to the topic later. So,
I've been constantly thinking about how to do a workshop with home labs, and like I've always been cynical about, well, if you're not using the same hardware, like you're not guaranteed anything is going to work the same, right?
you can just do a hypervisor workshop, basically.
Yeah.
Just like everybody set up Proxmox, and then we can do like VXLAN between your partner and moving VMs across, some kind of like activity like that.
That's a good one too. I like that idea. I like it, but there's still minimum requirements for something like that.
Like no, you would use your laptop and VMware Workstation and run a Proxmox VM.
Yeah.
And then like we would basically explore and explain all the features of Proxmox and how to set it up, and make a cluster with your partner, set up VXLAN so that you guys sharing the same network bridge, and then you can try to transfer a VM from one person's Proxmox to the other.
Yeah,
I could see that being like a possibility.
No, definitely. I think so. As long as it, we still need minimum requirements. I would say like
I've run Proxmox on a laptop with 2 cores and 8 gigs of RAM.
8 gigs of RAM. Okay, yeah, 8 gigs of RAM I think is Normally I would say, okay, 16 would be if you want to do something like really big, but 8 gigs should be doable. Like, remember, because people are watching streams and stuff too, so it has to be fit within.
I
don't-
Yeah, I mean,
home lab. I have an AMD FX CPU with one hard drive running Proxmox with a couple VMs.
AMD
that work?
FX, that single, that non-multi-threaded beast.
Yep, when I run multiple Windows VMs, it's chugging.
Yeah, I would, no doubt.
But Linux VMs run great, so not complaining.
I really like the container feature of Proxmox. It's one of the main reasons I switched.
I actually haven't had a chance to use it. Is it pretty good to like compared to like just running like a Docker host VM?
Docker would be more of like an ephemeral container, although you can run persistent Docker containers. So like I'll run the LXC container, let's say, to host Ghost CMS or something, like I'm playing with a website generator, because I want to turn it off, turn it on, access the file system again. But I would run Docker if I wanted to just like, I want to test something and, delete it right afterwards. Because Docker, it's heavily minimized, whereas the LXC, you can have an OS LXC. So you can have like an Ubuntu container, or you can have a Ghost CMS container that already has all the things stripped out.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, you can run Docker with persistent storage with the like by mounting a volume, but yeah.
Yeah. But this is what I'm saying, like the design concept behind Docker is to remove everything that's not necessary to the system, and then have these sort of ephemeral containers to run your process. And the container does the same, like it follows the same design principles as Docker and LXC follow the same principles. They use C groups and AppArmor and bridges and namespaces and things like that. It's just a matter of design concept.
Okay, cool. I'll try to check it out if I have some time.
Yeah, thanks for the information, CK.
On your Proxmox, run the pvim upgrade, I think, command, and you'll download the latest images for the LXC containers.
Yeah, John, your slides are like they're flipped, like they're like mirrored. So
How did that happen?
Yeah, I can. Yeah,
I think that's.
I can. You know what? It's because it flips it on my screen, so I thought I needed to flip it.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Because I'm doing the fake webcam thing.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Let me flip that. Let me fix that.
But it's cool how you set that whole thing up. I like it.
There you go.
It's like part of the presentation is you have to figure out how to flip it yourself to understand what's going on.
Exactly.
Because it's faking a webcam, what it does is it automatically flips the video so that as you move your head to one side, you see it moving the quote unquote correct direction.
Right. Yeah. So you're not.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
that's fine.
Awesome. You ready to
All
go?
right. Yeah. Ready to go.
Sure.
So
let
let's
me.
get.
Do you want me to
go
introduce
ahead.
you?
Sure. Go ahead.
So for those who don't know, we have a familiar face, John Simpson. He was here during our first ISSessions of the semester. It was like a long time ago, but yeah, he was one of the guest hosts or guest panelists rather. John is an alumni, and he graduated, when was it, 5 years ago, 6 years ago? It's been a while. And 2015, okay, right. And he's currently a vulnerability researcher and team lead at Trend Micro in Toronto. So yeah, take it away.
Thanks, guys. This is a talk that I have done for, I think, the past 4 years. First time I did this was 2016. And the kind of the big reason behind it is, you know, this industry is so vast and so big. And when you're entering into this program, you know, you've seen the description of the program, you've seen some of the course descriptions, but there's really, it's very difficult to kind of express what the industry is really like. So I've tried my best to kind of cram as much as I can in terms of talking about the, you know, different aspects of the industry, but also some of the things in navigating the industry, navigating the program, because this is a very difficult degree program. So without further ado, let's get right into it here. So I might use words and terminology that you're unfamiliar with. I do try to avoid, for this particular talk, to use as little industry terminology as possible. Sometimes it is really unavoidable, but I will try to as much as possible. If you do need me to clarify or explain something further, please ask. Ignore the fact that I say put your hand up or come talk to me after, because usually we do this in person. But yeah, just ask questions on Discord, or, you know, if you want to ask me questions later on Twitter or Discord, just yeah, please go ahead. All right, so who am I? I'm John Simpson, known as Straley on Twitter and everywhere else. I graduated 2015. I'm currently the team lead of the Vulnerability Research Service at Trend Micro in Toronto, and I still am primarily a vulnerability researcher in that role. I also have had some experience in like defensive and security operations center type work, as well as penetration testing and vulnerability assessments. I also previously did a lot of just like general IT work, tiny little bit of development work as well. And before that, I did something entirely different, which was I was a nationally ranked figure skater and a figure skating coach. So that was basically my previous life. I'm also a fur parent to 2 rather chunky cats and a kind of evil but pretty darn adorable corgi. And you can follow him on Instagram if you so choose. All right, so what are we doing here? The information security industry is really quite big. We're just going to call it InfoSec for the rest of the presentation. When I, discovered the program at Sheridan, I only really knew about ethical hacking as a possible career option. And I didn't actually really have any understanding of what it entailed, what I would actually be doing. I just thought, hey, I get to hack stuff, cool. So we're going to go through as much industry info as possible, what types of companies you can work for, job roles, learning resources, and a bunch of non-technical career advice as well. And as usual, I will make the slides available. Okay, so there's a lot of different career options out there. We're going to start by looking at who you can work for, so the types of organizations you can actually work for in this industry. So very popular option, which you're going to say, I would say a really large percentage of alumni and co-op students even wind up working for is consulting firms. So you're typically doing work that's focused on serving a particular client. There's the big 4 firms, which is Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Ernst & Young, and KPMG. There's also a lot of boutique firms that only really deal with InfoSec. They tend not to do anything else. So places like Security Compass or Access to Networks, both of which have and currently employ Sheridan grads. You can also work for vendors. So that would be, for example, who I work for. Security-specific vendors like Trend Micro, Symantec, FireEye, etc. There's other vendors as well that are not explicitly security vendors, but they do a lot of security stuff. So like Cisco, for example, they're first and foremost a networking company, but they have a ton of security hardware that they do sell. There's more. So there's, of course, in-house security teams, which is security-related stuff for one company. And while I can sum that up in like 2 tiny little points, that's a huge, huge, huge chunk of the industry. In fact, that's probably, the biggest sector. So I'm not really intending to oversimplify it like that, but that's really what it is. You're doing any number of security things inside a company. And of course, there's government. So, you could work for CSIS, which is our CIA, CSA, CSE, which is our NSA. They're both constantly hiring. I know like RCMP and police are often hiring as well. So yeah, lots of options depending on what your particular preference is for your career. And there's, of course, also academia. Schools such as Sheridan, as I'm sure you all know, are constantly looking for experienced professors. Typically does require a master's degree as a bare minimum, and it's probably best to have industry experience beforehand, so you can at least speak with some authority on the things that you're teaching. There's also a lot of long-term research opportunities that do come up from time to time. They do tend to be hotly contested, but just an example, Citizen Lab, based out of U of T, does have a lot of tech and human rights related research. So what sort of things can you do, in the context of those companies? So there's a ton of subfields. I can't cover them all or even come close to covering them all. Leslie Carhart, better known as Hacks for Pancakes, has a really good detailed rundown on her blog. And yeah, so it's from 2015, but it's still equally valid. Yeah, there's maybe a couple new things here or there, but by and large, it's still a really solid read. So we're going to kind of follow her lead, and we're going to split these into offense and defense. So, and as a disclaimer, obviously my career has not been that long, and I haven't worked in most of these roles at all. So, take what I say with a grain of salt, but I've tried my best to be as accurate as possible. So first off, there's kind of the attacking side. It's not all just attacking, but this is, I call it attacking because this is really the offensive side of the industry. Sometimes referred to as red team. The term itself is a bit overloaded, and if you really want to start an argument on InfoSec Twitter, start calling everything red team, and you'll see how testy people get about that. So there's penetration testing, also known as pen testing for short. This is where you're basically simulating a real attack on a well-defined target, which is known as the scope. So you may do this consulting for clients, Big Four, or a company like Security Compass, or you may do internal testing, like an internal red team in a large organization like Amazon. Even some of the insurance companies have, insurance companies and banks have internal red teams. There's penetration testers that kind of generalize and will kind of go after any sort of, and work on any sort of job that they're tasked with. But there are people who specialize. So there's, people who specialize only in doing industrial control systems, also known as ICS. There's a really wide variety of work here. Even working on the same team from week to week, you might be asked to test a single web application one week, and you may the next week have to do a really extensive no holds barred test the next week. And sometimes this may also include physical security and social engineering. So there's a really wide range, and it will vary from organization to organization, and even client to client if you're in the consulting world. What kind of skills do you need to do this sort of stuff? Well, you need really broad knowledge of a lot of different things: operating systems, network protocols, programming languages. Problem-solving skills are huge. Google can only take you so far, but at the same time, knowing how to Google efficiently is also really, really, really a big skill. You also have to have a ton of patience. You're going to spend a lot of time waiting for things, waiting for scans to finish. Maybe you're waiting to see if someone clicks on a particular, phishing email that you sent, and you're waiting for a callback of some sort. There is a lot of waiting going on. So a few things to be aware of. Your testing scope is often going to be really narrow and strict. So as an example, you may have to ask the client's permission before actually testing an attack. You may say, oh, this thing is vulnerable to this, and you have to go and ask the client and say, is it okay if I try the exploit on this thing? There may be a lot of travel these days, obviously a lot less so. And that in itself may be good or bad depending on you and your life situation. For me personally, I don't want to travel a whole heck of a lot. I don't mind it once in a while, but a lot of it is not really my thing. Whereas other people, yeah, they want to travel like crazy. You will also be writing reports constantly. That's a huge part of it. And you're going to deal with a lot of red tape. There's unfortunately no way around that. Stuff that's not directly attacking, so vulnerability research. So a vulnerability is a flaw in a piece of software that might allow an attacker to do something they're not supposed to be able to do, whether that's gain information, execute arbitrary code that the attacker chooses, disrupt services, etc. So there's several varieties of vulnerability research. So there's zero-day research, which is looking for new vulnerabilities. There is what I do, which is end-day research, which is understanding and figuring out how to exploit reported and or known vulnerabilities. There's exploit development, which I class as its own thing simply because you're creating a functional exploit using vulnerabilities. So it's a bit of a bridge between end-day, but exploit development, you can often spend a phenomenal amount of time just trying to create a full exploit or exploit chain out of several vulnerabilities. Then we also have bug bounties, which I know were mentioned in the news segment. So bug bounties are, you're basically hunting for vulnerabilities in a specific organization's application or site. And this also does include misconfigurations, which in itself is not quite the same as, what we talked about when we're talking vulnerability research, but, still really qualifies. Vulnerability research is often quite specialized, but not always. There may be people who specialize in mobile or web-based stuff, doing research on IoT products, embedded systems, etc. What kind of skills do you need? Well, again, a lot of fundamentals, and you have to have that sort of insane desire to solve puzzles. CTFs, or capture the flag challenges, are a great way to get into this. We'll talk about that in a second, though. You probably should be able to read and understand assembly and a wide variety of programming languages, things like also reading packet captures, if you're inspecting something that's a network-based vulnerability, as well as you probably need to be able to learn from reading super boring specification documents like RFCs. Security vendors tend to employ the largest number of vulnerability researchers, but there are, of course, other organizations that do this. And there are some ways to make money independently. So you can sell zero-day vulnerabilities that you discover to organizations like Zero Day Initiative, which is part of Trend Micro. There are gray market vendors such as Rhodium, where they require that you have a fully functional exploit, as in, this allows me to run whatever code I want on the target's computer. And when I say that, I also always want to add a word of caution that, be aware of what will happen with your vulnerability when selling it. So the reason why I kind of picked those two examples between Zero Day Initiative and Zerodium, Zero Day Initiative will first and foremost report your vulnerability to the affected vendor to make sure it gets fixed. And they will reward you for doing that. And whereas Zerodium will turn around and sell those exploits to their customers to use them. You don't know who their customers are. You don't know what they're using it for. So if you don't potentially want that on your contents, then, that's not really a direction you want to go. So let's talk a little bit about bug bounties. Now, bug bounties are, have a lot of hype. Bug bounty platforms like to really pump up the people that have made a ton of money. But, we'll talk about that in a second here. So bug bounties are basically you legally hack participating organizations and get paid if you find someone with consequence. And I bold participating for a reason, because you can't just go hack anyone and expect that they're going to pay you money if you find something. Some organizations do run their own programs, larger organizations typically. Others use third parties like HackerOne or BugCrowd. Rule number one for a bug bounty program is do not be a jerk. So if you do get into doing bug bounties, when you're submitting a bug bounty, ask yourself these couple things. Is there an actual security impact worth submitting? If you're curious, go look at past submissions on HackerOne and BugCrowd. They're not all public, but a lot of them do get disclosed publicly. Make sure that your bug is actually in scope according to the terms of the bug bounty program. And, do you have a detailed report and proof of concept that would allow the organization to easily and reliably reproduce the vulnerability? If it's something where you accidentally did this and you're not really sure how it happened, don't report that, because it's just going to cause more hassle for everybody. Now, in terms of the money in bug bounties, it's really not easy to make a living on bug bounties alone in North America based on our cost of living. So Duo did a really great piece in 2019 on, kind of dialing down the hype of bug bounty programs. So on HackerOne, 97.5% of researchers that are registered on HackerOne have never sold a bug. 0.3%, roughly 1,000 researchers, have made $500 or more total. So 0.3% have made $500 or more. 0.03% have earned $100,000. So if you think of, and this is not like per year, this is total through the lifetime of the HackerOne platform as of that date in 2019. So if you think of trying to make a living and being able to afford rent and car payments and all that kind of stuff, not really going to happen with bug bounties, but it could be a fun supplement. All right, so let's talk about some roles in defending here. So blue team, we kind of call this blue team. If you remember from our panel, I'm not really a big fan of the red team, blue team, but this just helps me kind of separate the different types of roles. So probably the most common entry-level role, and what you'll see a lot of people start in straight out of school and do on co-op, is what we call security analyst. Typically, you'll work in a security operations center, maybe as an in-house security team for a large organization, banks, insurance companies, or you may work for a managed security services provider. Consulting companies provide this, where they're basically providing security monitoring services to companies that aren't big enough to have their own, or just prefer to outsource it. So you'll do things like you'll be monitoring security logs, you'll be working with security information and event manager products, such as ArcSight or QRadar or Splunk, and you're going to respond to potential security incidents. As you become more experienced, you get to do things like maybe a little bit of malware analysis, some proactive threat hunting, so looking for attackers that are on your network that haven't been discovered yet, and you can be more involved in security improvements throughout the organization. Entry level often consists of shift work, not always, but quite frequently, if you're a tier 1 analyst in a SOC, it is frequently shift work. What kind of skills do you need? Basics in networking, operating systems, tiny bit of programming, just to be able to automate some things to make your job easier. A lot of patience, like insane amounts of patience. You really also need rock solid communication skills. You have to be able to clearly communicate what's happening and the potential impact. So if something's going down and you're not communicating precisely what is happening, things can go from bad to worse really quickly. And just to be aware, defending is a really hard job. People who work on the offensive side of security, they get that instant dopamine hit when they're successful. When you pop a shell or you get domain admin on a network, you get that nice rush of, yes, I did something. I did what I was trying to do. There isn't, that thing doesn't exist for blue teams. If you find an attacker, it's like, okay, great, but A, an attacker got in and I found them, and B, there's no guarantee there aren't more. So this is a starting point for a career. If you're going to do this kind of work, make sure you work for an organization that offers a clear path for career progress. Every company that has a SOC is hiring always, all the time, every single one of them. They can never hire enough of these people. Okay, so then you get into more what I would call, it's not officially blue team, kind of is. But building and maintaining defenses, so a security engineer. So you're more working with the actual, software products and hardware, that's part of the security infrastructure. So you're doing things like managing firewalls, intrusion detection, and intrusion prevention systems, also known as IDS and IPS. Security information event managers, endpoint security solutions, so like antivirus, that sort of stuff. And these are the people that keep the SOC that we just talked about running smoothly. And this is what I actually did for a good chunk of my co-op term. Sales engineers sort of fall into this also, but you're mostly helping integrate your company's products as part of a sales engagement for a security vendor. As you become a more experienced security engineer, you become a security architect. So you start kind of designing bigger picture stuff. You start putting all the pieces together. All this kind of work tends to be very sysadmin type thing. You know, so in terms of skills required, you really need to know your way around a command line interface, because a lot of these things, that's all they have. You do need a fairly deep knowledge on a variety of operating systems as well. Programming, again, will help, especially when it comes to, you know, automating some mundane tasks. And sometimes you may need technology-specific experience or certifications. Don't worry, you know, too much about the product-specific stuff, because again, when you're on co-op, you'll be able to get exposed to a lot of that. So as Leslie mentions in her blog post, try not to get locked in by only working with a single vendor's products. You know, if you work for a vendor, obviously, you know, you're going to know your company's products really well, but you often will have to integrate with other vendor stuff. You know, a company may have like, you know, Trend Micro, IDS, IPS box, and they may have like CrowdStrike on their endpoint. And so you want to make sure that all this stuff integrates properly. All right, so now the kind of fun but also unfortunate side of the industry is digital forensics and incident response, also known as DFIR. You can be a forensic analyst. So as a forensic analyst, you're going to either be trying to recover data to figure out how a device was compromised or abused, or you may be trying to recover evidence to be used in legal proceedings, also known as e-discovery. You use a lot of forensic-specific tools for analyzing drive images, memory dumps, etc. Consulting firms typically provide this, and larger organizations do have in-house forensics teams. You know, Mandiant is probably one of the most well-known incident response or consulting organizations these days, and they're quite good at it. What kind of skills are required? Well, extensive understanding of operating systems at a bare minimum. You need to know, you know, how data is stored on disks and in memory, and you know, when you're really digging for those little threads, little pieces of information, you need to know all the little tricks of how to pull that information out. And you guessed it, patience. I'm sure Nick, who worked in forensics for quite a while, can tell you how many times he's had to just like sit around while drives get imaged, or you know, they scan for files. If you love looking for needle in the haystack, this might be the thing for you. It's not for everybody, but you know, some people really do enjoy that. Now, slightly different, similar but slightly different, is an incident responder, where you're figuring out how to deal with an incident and help coordinate the resolution, as opposed to, you know, really digging in the weeds and you know, trying to extract specific pieces of data. This is where you're trying to build a timeline of what happened in order to fully resolve the incident and determine the effects. This also involves coordinating the response with all the relevant parties. You know, same set of employers as a forensic analyst, just a slightly different purpose to the job, and you know, as a result, some of the tasks will be a little different. Skills required: communication skills are honestly #1 for this kind of thing. You're dealing with very time-sensitive things. You want to resolve an incident as fast as possible, because you don't know how much damage the attacker could do if they stay in the network any longer, or if you don't know if they're still in the network. You do share some technical skills with forensic analysts, but it does require that you can put the pieces of the puzzle together, as opposed to being able to find the pieces in the first place. And just, again, be aware, incident response can be very high stress. There can be long and weird hours, and likely will require travel. Same thing does apply for a forensic analyst as well. All right, if you really love programming, you know, but you also love security, you can get into application security, also known as AppSec. The industry really needs programmers that can help create more secure software, not just write secure code. Your job is basically to help ensure that everything is developed from the beginning with security as part of the process. Good luck in some cases. Basically, any organization that does development requires this. And with so many organizations doing continuous integration and continuous delivery, security needs to be an integral part. And this is where that term DevSecOps comes from, where we're integrating security as part of this whole development lifecycle. So skills required, obviously programming and general development and software engineering skills are pretty important. You probably need to have very deep knowledge of at least one major language. You should have knowledge, at least a baseline knowledge of vulnerabilities and how they're exploited. These days also, you probably really want to have knowledge of containers like Docker and container orchestration such as Kubernetes. It's almost mandatory these days. It's really hard to find an organization that isn't using that kind of stuff in some way. Also, you should probably be familiar with cloud because a lot of the stuff is getting deployed or starts with cloud. And the cloud thing honestly applies for a lot of things these days that I haven't mentioned. Pen testing, all that kind of stuff. Cloud knowledge of specific cloud infrastructure can be really beneficial there. All right, then we have, onto the slightly less technical side, we have auditing and compliance. This is where you're ensuring organizations are being compliant with whatever standards they're required to comply with. So one of the most prevalent ones is the payment card industry data security standard. There's certainly more, and it does depend on the industry. Healthcare in Canada has PHIPAA. In the US, they have HIPAA. Large businesses tend to have internal people for this stuff, but you also you'll also have a lot of companies, just by a legal requirement, you'll have to have external companies come in and do these audits. So yeah, lots of consulting work for that as well. Skills required, you do need to still have a solid technical understanding, even if you're not always hands-on, but you need to understand the technical parts behind what you're auditing or what you're looking for. Communication and report writing is key. I think I've mentioned that for every single job role here. Communication and report writing are really the cornerstone of being an effective InfoSec professional. Broad, but not necessarily deep security knowledge. So again, you need to have that sort of broad base of understanding of as many things that you might encounter as possible. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about diversity in the industry. So the InfoSec and hack community is full of a wide variety of people. It is like the rest of IT, and especially like the startup world, is heavily dominated by white dudes like myself. But I implore everyone to treat everyone with the utmost respect, regardless of race, creed, religion, gender identification, sexual preference, even their abilities. If you don't, and you're sort of publicly calling out people for any of these sorts of things, or you're treating people negatively in a bad way for these reasons, leaders in the community will call you out for sure. And this will impact your career. And the reason why is because, you're going to have to work with all sorts of people, whether you personally agree with their lifestyle or not is irrelevant. You need to still treat them with the utmost respect. So if you, like me, are not a part of a minority, you don't get to tell people who belong to such groups how to feel about issues specific to them. You can signal boost their opinions as a sign of support. And similarly, don't assume something is offensive to a particular group of people. So one thing that's been happening a lot lately is, someone will post something and someone who is not a part of, someone claims that something is offensive to a particular minority, but that person is not a member of those minorities. And the vast majority of people who do belong to that minority said, like, I don't care about this. Stop, tagging me in this tweet. I don't care. This is not a big deal. So, again, signal boosting is okay, but, putting words into their mouths is, not. Now, I and most of the community have absolutely zero tolerance for sexism, racism, any other form of discrimination. It is unfortunately still very common in the online community, especially the chat platforms. Honestly, it's unfortunate, but I don't think a week goes by when I don't see someone getting caught in the industry, getting called out on Twitter for something that's outright hateful. And we really don't have we don't have room for that in this industry. We need as diverse a population as possible, because the people that we're protecting are diverse, and we need to build systems for everybody, not just for us white dudes. All right, so that leads me into the importance of community. The vast majority of important people in InfoSec are really awesome, approachable people. They may be very busy, but they're approachable and they will help when they can. I urge you to make connections and learn by being on Twitter, different Slack groups, Discord servers. When conferences are a thing again, you can make amazing connections at conferences. For virtual conferences, try to participate in online discussions if they're, they provide a space for that. Even just send a thank you to speakers. Say, oh, hey, I really like this. This is really interesting to me. And you can say, hey, I'm just starting out, and you can start a conversation and say, would you have any resources that you could point me to, for me to kind of learn more about this type of thing. And that instantly creates that connection with that person. So, it's different how we make those connections, obviously, with all the COVID stuff, but, you can still make it happen, and it's still really important to try. So where should you start? Honestly, as much as Twitter is the worst, it's honestly probably the best place to, make connections and to keep your finger on the pulse of the industry on a day-to-day basis. Keep up on it even a few minutes a day. I would not recommend getting into the habit that I'm into, which is like doom scrolling to infinity for many hours a day. But at least, give things a quick look. So now what I used to do is I used to give like a big slide of a whole bunch of different Twitter accounts that I thought people could follow, but that was really ridiculous and kind of a pain. So I created a list on my Twitter account called InfoSec Must Follow. So you can go check out that list, and all those accounts, while they may not tweet 100% about InfoSec, and that's fine and to be expected, these are people who, when they do tweet about InfoSec, they're usually tweeting stuff that you probably want to be reading. All right, so a couple of do's and don'ts about interacting with the community. Do reach out to people on Twitter for advice and mentorship. People want to help. If they don't have time, they hopefully most of them will be able to just tell you upfront, I'm sorry, I really don't have time, but they may be able to point you to someone who does have time. And another thing, if you are actually reaching out to someone, don't just send a message that says hi or hello or do you have some time. Just come outright and say, ask your question right away. People are busy. Also, people like myself get really anxious when someone just messages me and says, hi, can I ask you a question? Because I have no idea what's coming. Also, participate in discussions when you feel comfortable doing it, even if it's only to ask clarifying questions. And last but not least, be humble. Always be open to the chance that you're wrong about something. Be quick to defer to someone with more experience. Now, some don'ts. Don't use the community as your personal Google. If you've honestly gone and looked and you couldn't find an answer to something, absolutely go and ask. But if you didn't even bother and your knee-jerk reaction is just say, oh, what's that? Do some of the homework yourself. And don't demand things from people. People are doing this out of the goodness of their hearts and with their free time. So, respect them for that if they can't give you everything you want out of them. Also, don't make a habit of trying to prove other people wrong constantly, and don't just participate in discussions just to be critical. I think we all know some of those people on Twitter that the only time they post stuff is to be critical of something or to be negative. And honestly, when I start to get an idea that someone's like that, I unfollow them. I really have no need to see what they write if all they're doing is constantly shitting on people. Makes them feel bad, makes you look like an asshole, even if you're right, doesn't matter. The other thing that we do a lot in the industry, and that I would say, avoid this on Twitter as much as possible or in any social media, don't engage in user shaming. It's kind of like being a doctor. You have this amazing education, you went to school forever, you did your residency, you did all this learning, right? That'd be like doing that and then going and making fun of patients for not knowing why they're sick. Like that's not their job. That's why you went to school. That's why you're doing it. So that's the same thing. Like, we cannot have this expectation that users have the same level of knowledge and understanding of security threats that we do. Okay. So another place that you can, kind of interact with the community is IRC, also known as Internet Relay Chat. It was one of the first widely popular real-time chat protocols. It's still used somewhat. It's not as popular as it was in the heyday. IRC networks are formed by a bunch of different servers all linked together, so it's somewhat decentralized. Many IRC networks have web-based clients available. You probably want a proper client. The Freenode network of servers is a good place to start. There's the security and Linux and reverse engineering channels for starters. But again, IRC's, kind of quiet these days. But, you can always just join and idle and read for a while. We do have our own IRC network that is connected to Discord, but very few people use it. But if you really prefer to use that instead of Discord, let me know and I can give you the details. Slack. It's IRC on steroids, generally invite only, web, desktop, mobile clients. I think everyone for the most part knows what Slack is these days. Technically, it's intended for teams of people who work together, but it has been co-opted for communities as well. A number of communities still use Slack, but a large number have moved to Discord, which obviously we're on right now. So I don't really need to talk about it that much, because usually I do this in person, but, just, one of the larger communities that I know of is called the Many Hats Club. You can check them out at the Discord URL there. It does get a bit silly at times. It's occasionally offensive. The moderation team is generally reasonable. I'm not on it. It's not really my scene, but, I was on there for a little bit. And again, you may get some good value out of it. Blogs. Lots of security blogs out there. Most of them do show up in the news channel on Discord. Most of the ones that I've listed here. Some are run by companies. They can potentially have an agenda, so just be aware of that. Who's the source of the information. Few to start with: Wired, Naked Security, the Hacker News, which is different from Hacker News. They can sometimes be pretty clickbaity. So again, just be aware of that. Packetstorm Security, Registered Security, and Graham Cluley has a really good blog as well. All right, conferences, which is obviously this year has been very different. A lot of conferences are very expensive. They're intended for industry people who are being paid to attend and who are having their companies pay for their entry. COVID has given a lot of opportunities to see conferences virtually for much less money or for free. So take advantage if you are so inclined. Some conferences do provide student pricing or are just generally inexpensive. In-person cons are really critical for meeting people, and you do always learn something. So here's just a quick little list of, conferences that are usually local, but this year pretty much all gone virtual. So Sector just took place last week. That's Canada's largest information security conference. It's, I would say comparable to a Black Hat conference, just Canada. B-Sides Toronto, which was a couple weekends ago, was also virtual. It's usually just before Sector. It's inexpensive to attend in person. It's small, and it's a fantastic place to meet people in the industry. I would say if you only ever attend one in-person conference early in your career, go to B-Sides Toronto. That's where you're going to make the best connections. There's also Recon, which is every June in Montreal typically. It's a pretty hardcore reverse engineering focused conference, both hardware and software reverse engineering. I've been once. It was super intense, but really, really cool. Countermeasure in Ottawa, which is actually not in November this year. It's coming up this coming weekend, actually. One of my coworkers is speaking. So, but it's a big corporate event, very expensive typically. I don't know what they're doing in terms of virtual this year, but I imagine they're still charging for it. And then we have NorthSec in Montreal, typically in May. They have a conference and a really big, awesome Capture the Flag. So yeah, that's one that another one, if you're into CTFs, that's one definitely to get out to. So other major conferences, DEF CON, they did it virtually this year, biggest hacking convention in the world every August. You need to go to this at least once. I say this as someone who is still yet to go. I was planning on going this year, and then, well, 2020 happened. Black Hat in Vegas. It's basically corporate DEF CON. It's the same week as DEF CON in Vegas. B-Sides Las Vegas is also held during this time. It's a great alternative to Black Hat if you don't want to sell out the money or can't. And there's also a Black Hat Europe, which is in London, that I went to last year, and there's a Black Hat Asia. Speaking of DEF CON, I think there's also a DEF CON China, although again, I think that was canceled this year. But yeah, again, personally, I would not go to DEF CON China myself, but your mileage may vary. ShmooCon in Washington, D.C., pretty awesome con in January. Again, keep an eye out. A lot of these guys may go 100% virtual and free, which is great because you'll get to see some really good talks. But just, try and see if you can participate in any sort of communication and meet some people that way. The Chaos Computer Club, also known as C3, it's basically like DEF CON Europe. It's very much like a hacking conference as opposed to a pure InfoSec conference. But seriously, there's tons of conferences. There's like one a week worldwide at a minimum. And a lot of those conferences, like Recon, for example, have very specialized purposes. All right, so learning resources. All those conferences we talked about, most of the talks become freely available online eventually, or even streamed live. So Sector, for example, I believe will post a lot of their talks eventually. Online capture flags. You know what? You can't learn much better than by doing stuff. So Ring 0 Team is the old URL. I think it still works though, and it'll just redirect you to the new one. I think it's called like Ring 0 CTF or something like that now, but you'll still get there. Over the Wire, great places to start. If you're new to like the command line, I know we just had that workshop on Over the Wire Bandit a couple weeks ago, but yeah, definitely if you missed that, go play around with Bandit. Teaches you like a lot of little fun stuff about Linux command line. Then there's also, of course, Hack the Box. You do have to do a challenge to sign up, but that's kind of half the fun. You can also check out ctftime.org for info on time-limited CTF competitions. Get together with some friends in the CTF channel on Discord, play as a team. There's also in-person CTFs when we can have them again. NorthSec in Montreal. I would say absolutely that's the one you really want to go to. The Sheridan CTF when we are finally able to hold it again. And of course C3X, which is more of it's a competition mixed with a like a simulation, a business simulation, which is pretty awesome. And our favorite person, Lee Kagan, as well as Ben Wells, have created that and put that on every year. All right, more learning. So I used to kind of post a couple links about general sites where you can just kind of learn general stuff, but I find that those are not really that great these days. They don't really give you a lot of direction in terms of like what you should be learning necessarily. So I tend to just lean towards topic-specific sites as opposed to a single place to learn a bunch of things. So that's where, being on Discord, being on Twitter, asking those questions, hey, you know what, I'm really interested in reverse engineering. What resources can you point me to? And, people are more than happy to provide that kind of stuff. Books. There's a book for every topic you can imagine. If you're looking for a book on a particular topic, again, reach out on social media or Discord, just ask people. As students, I believe you still have access to books 24/7 if it's still called that. There's a ton of stuff on there. Keep an eye on Humble book bundles. There's lots of programming and security specific bundles. Not all the bundles are necessarily great, but again, just ask, hey, what's your opinion on this publisher or whatever, and yeah, you'll be able to figure it out. Some of your textbooks will also be useful for a very, very, very long time. Operating system design, for example, you will probably want to keep that around as a reference for basically ever, because it is actually has come in handy for me on several occasions. All right, certifications. So you will, of course, learn about the existence of many certifications: CISSP, SANS, GX, Security Plus, CEH, OSCP, OSCE, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do not worry about these until you are in the industry. You are in a security degree program. That security degree, especially early career, is more valuable than any of these certificates. So the other thing is, most of them are expensive. You're already spending a lot of money on school. When you're looking for your first job, there's really no expectation that you're going to have certifications. Also, many employers are going to pay for them if you present a good business case. Some professional services firms basically require that you get your CISSP once you have some work experience, and of course they're going to pay for it, and they're going to pay for you to take the course to make sure you pass it. So my personal opinion on certs is that they're really twofold. You want to look good to clients if you're consulting, and for you personally, it's to help you look good to prospective future employers looking for experienced hires. It's kind of a way of helping out with the HR firewall, so to speak, to make sure your resume actually gets through. Some of the certs may actually teach you something useful. Do not count on it. Don't expect that you're going to learn something amazing just because you've gone and you've taken a course for a certification. OSCP and OSCE are a good example of certs that will force you to learn some useful new stuff. The Certified Ethical Hacker, or CEH, is a good counterexample. Honestly, do not touch the CEH with a 10-foot pole. It is useless. You cannot become a certified ethical hacker by answering a multiple choice test, period. So just don't. I think it's terrible. All right, career progression. So especially those of you who are in first, second year, you haven't hit co-op or anything yet. You may be worried about your very first industry job. Obviously you've entered into this program because you want to get work, but don't worry about it yet. In case you are worried about it, you do have your mandatory 8-month co-op between third and fourth year. As long as you work hard during co-op, you'll generally have a job waiting for you once you're done school. And this is by far the easiest way to jumpstart your career. You might not want to work there super long term. You may not really like the type of work you're doing, but the experience, the general industry knowledge you gain, and the contacts you make will open up your opportunities like crazy. If you do have connections, use them. It kind of sounds weird, but if you have the privilege to have some people in your life that have connections to at least get you an interview, use that. Cold applying for jobs, unfortunately, rarely works these days. At least get yourself an introduction in some way, even if it's like a friend of a friend of a friend. That can really, really help things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal career progression. This is my own personal experience. This is not necessarily going to be reflective of what others went through or what will work for you. So I entered the program with a bit of a head start. I had over 15 years of casual experience with Linux. I'd always been a tinkerer with computers from a very young age, but I had no formal education or real programming experience other than, just tinkering with a couple things here and there. But literally, I maybe wrote 100 lines of code in my whole life before entering the program. I sold and repaired computers at Future Shop. Yay. In the summer between year 1 and 2, I did some general IT work for a small company where a friend of mine happened to be the CTO. Use your connections if you have them. And between year 2 and 3, I did development work for a variety of kiosks at IBM. Again, I leveraged a connection to get an interview. And sometimes that's all the only edge you need. If you're confident in an interview, but maybe your resume is a little weak, using those connections can really help out. For my co-op, I worked for Deloitte on the consulting side as opposed to working for their security operations center in Vaughan. I primarily worked in a security engineering type role in a client security operations center. In general, I didn't really like the work all that much, but because I worked hard, I arranged to work part-time during semester 7 and 8. So if you don't need the money, by the way, don't do it. I highly recommend that you don't. But so I decided to stick it out for a while. And, because I worked hard and even though I didn't like the work that much, I stuck it out. I was able to transfer to the vulnerability assessment and pen testing team. They knew what to expect from me. They knew that I was a hard worker. They knew that I knew my stuff at that point. So I was able to leverage that experience that they had with me to say, hey, if you guys want to keep me around, I'd rather be doing, pen testing and vulnerability assessments. So they did that. Well, after a short period of time, I realized that was just not really quite the right thing for me, even though that's what I always thought I wanted to do. And I started to start keeping my eyes and ears open for new opportunities. With roughly 2 years of not completely full-time experience, I was able not only to apply to positions that were not completely entry level, but I had recruiters actually coming after me already after, barely 2 years of experience. I wound up with 2 offers at the same time for 2 completely different positions. One was security operations, the other was what I'm now doing. I went with my gut first choice, and I'm, 4.5 years later, I'm, very, very happy with it, and I'm now the team lead of the team that I joined. So in terms of your early career progression, again, I did say this in the panel, a couple weeks back. Knowledge-wise, I really, really highly suggest that you start with a breadth of knowledge and then go for depth. It's much easier and faster to learn more about something you have a basic awareness of than starting from scratch as a completely new topic. Early career interviews tend to involve a lot of general questions about a wide array of relevant topics. This also helps prevent yourself from getting stuck doing something you don't like. So like me, you may have already chosen a specialization. I thought for sure I want to do pen testing. But had I completely neglected, my CTF playing and my sort of obsession with, hacking and vulnerabilities, I wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to work at what I now do. So, don't make that decision for the first couple of years, whether you're 100% sure that this is definitely what I want to be doing. And even 15 years down the line, you can still change your mind. It's just going to be, you're going to have to leverage some of your work experience at that point, obviously, to keep your career going in an upward fashion. And in general, some career paths are ideal for generalists. So while vulnerability research is a very intense technical field, there is a lot, having general knowledge of a lot of different things is very helpful for vulnerability research. Okay. We can throw a slide about burnout in the age of COVID and working from home, and this for me personally is why I'm on vacation. I took 8 work days of vacation, and honestly, it was something I decided about a week before I took vacation. I was like, that's it, I'm done. So burnout is incredibly, incredibly common in our industry. Even if you love the work, as I do, it's still very stressful. It's mentally taxing. The frequency and speed at which people reach burnout is inevitably going to increase with everybody working from home. And there's any number of reasons for that, whether it's, your environment is not ideal. If you live in like a bachelor apartment, or you live at home and you're in your room, your work, your sleep, everything's happening in the same space, and it's hard to disconnect and separate. So here's just some of my own personal rules for preventing a complete breakdown due to burnout. And this applies even when COVID isn't a thing, even when you're going into the office. So number one is don't make a habit of working longer than you're expected to. Yeah, okay, stuff happens. If it happens several times a week, it needs to be brought up with your supervisor. The company is not paying you to work all these extra hours, and it's not healthy. When you are done work, don't reply to any work-related emails or messages. If you can, mute the notifications, turn them off completely when you're not actually in work hours. Take your vacation time like I am right now. Minimum 1 full week at a time. Don't just take like a day off here, a day off there. It needs to be consecutive days. And you do not touch work. You do not respond to emails. You do not respond to messages. You leave it all alone. You step away from it completely. That's what vacation is. And lastly, and this one's kind of hard for some people, myself included, don't do stuff you should be getting paid for in your current role as a hobby. Your brain needs a break. Now, that being said, if you're early career and you're in a position where you're not really that happy with the position, you're doing, industry related stuff on your own time for fun. And you're doing it not only for fun, but also because you're gaining knowledge for the job that you eventually want. That's a little different, but you still have to be careful on how much of that you do. Sometimes you do just need to take a break and step away, and, go outside, or, maybe not step away from the computer, but, play video games instead of hacking on stuff. Okay, so making your way through the program. In case you aren't already aware, I know you guys have just hit midterms, so you probably have somewhat of an idea of this at this point. The program is rigorous and challenging. Don't let the fact that you're at Sheridan College and not someplace like U of T or Waterloo fool you into complacency. This program does require full-time job hours, in my opinion, between a combination of in-class time and your classwork, study, and reading time. Depending on your current level of knowledge, first year may or may not feel difficult at all, but don't expect second year to be the same. First year for me felt very easy based on things like my Linux knowledge, general knowledge of programming concepts, but then second year just absolutely hit me like a ton of bricks because of how difficult it was. All right. So for those of you that are on the younger side, maybe you just came out of high school and maybe you're like me, you're knocking on the door of 40 and you still act like you're in high school sometimes. There will not necessarily be a lot of required work that counts for marks. Don't let that fool you into not doing the work. And that was something that my first attempt at post-secondary straight out of high school, I was very bad at. Read the recommended textbooks, make notes while you read. You will not retain anything if you're not making notes. If you are just learning programming for the first time, write a ton of code. Do all the examples that you can from the textbooks, the ones you're not assigned, everything. Write code every day. Take exercises from the textbook, do them. You'll thank me come exam and assignment time. All right, so 2020 is kind of weird, but I assume you guys still have like classes and things. Why is my slide? There we go. All right. Classes are still a thing. So I'm going to make some recommendations in terms of how to approach classes. I graduated with the highest cumulative GPA. I worked my ass off really hard to get that. It's not meant as a brag. It's more to say like, I know what I'm talking about when it comes to how to treat classes. So in terms of the things you need to do to eliminate distractions and effectively get the most out of your classes, it obviously is a little bit different, but it's pretty similar to what I would recommend for in-person classes. But number one, close all non-essential windows and mute notifications. Use focus mode on Windows 10 or do not disturb on your Mac. And the reason for this is you never know when you miss something really critical. My worst grade in class is literally because I was focused on my laptop for one 3-hour class that happened to cover about 50% of what was on the final exam in a single class. And yeah, that cost me my my coveted 4.0 GPA. Write notes by hand. My writing is terrible, but there's some solid research to show that you learn more by doing, by actually physically writing out due to differences in cognitive processing. Also, ask clarifying questions of your professors if you've been paying attention. If you know you gapped out, like I sometimes did, wait until a break or the end of class to clarify, just so you're not interrupting the professor to have them repeat themselves. With your non-class time, find classmates to study with and share knowledge. I think you guys all have your own Discords and stuff like that, so I think a lot of you guys are already doing that. Helping each other understand concepts will greatly enhance everyone's understanding. So like try to teach each other stuff. If you can explain something to someone else, you will yourself gain a much better understanding. Read ahead when possible. Lectures make a lot more sense and allow you to absorb more of the professor's expertise if you have a little bit of knowledge ahead of time. So that's kind of similar to when I talk about having a breadth of knowledge versus going really deep. If you have that little tiny entry level piece of knowledge about what's going to be talked about, then more of the words will make sense to you. And don't leave anything to the last minute. Something will 100% go wrong. It always does. So just don't do it. All right. Now we talked a little about like work burnout, but similarly with school, you have to figure out kind of balance and priorities, especially these days. Procrastination will absolutely be the death of you. We're all guilty of it. I struggled with it a lot, and I still do. If you're a gamer like me, use game time as a reward for completing something. If you game first, you're probably not going to stop and get your stuff done. It's inevitable. Do not sacrifice sleep and food. You may feel like, oh, I got to pull an all-nighter here, but ultimately being well-fed and well-rested is going to do more than, that extra 2 or 3 hours of studying ever will. It's going to, if you sacrifice sleep and food, yeah, your ability to learn and comprehend are going to suffer greatly, and you do need your brain working at full capacity for this program. If you're privileged enough not to need to work a part-time job, don't do it. Yeah, if you're fully supported, by parents or spouse or whatever through school, that's awesome. Take advantage of that. If you do need to work, because obviously, the situation is the reality is some of us need to work to go through school. You do have to kind of become a master at scheduling everything in your life, and you do have to have the discipline to stick to that schedule. All right, let's talk about your reputation. And this is in the context of school. Information security is a surprisingly small community. Sheridan alumni or people who know Sheridan alumni are everywhere. The reputation you create for yourself in school will follow you for a very, very, very long time. Honestly, there are people that were maybe only made it through the first year or two of the program, but the way that they behaved or the way that they treated other people is burned in my brain, and that's the only impression I have of those people, 7-8 years later. So just as an example, I'm now directly involved in interviewing and hiring, and there's plenty of other Sheridan alumni that are in similar positions, and our networks are pretty tight. So having a reputation for working your ass off is really more valuable than having amazing grades. Of course, you can shoot for both, and why wouldn't you? But if everyone in your group work, for example, everyone in your class knows that you've worked super hard, maybe you didn't get the best grades, but they know you worked and weren't slacking off, then people are going to respect that like crazy. And try not to piss people off. Be dependable. If you do agree to a deadline, especially with group work, you better stick to it. Don't be a leech. Again, especially in group work, you're not going to learn stuff. People are going to resent you. I encountered that, and it wasn't pleasant. Don't be afraid to admit you don't know something. If someone says, "Oh, hey, how about you take this part of the project?" And you're like, "I know nothing about that." Be honest about it, but say, "You know what? I'll figure it out, though." And the other thing is, people don't really like to be told they're wrong. Yes, people are wrong, but you just need to be very careful how you handle it. Have some tact. Don't just throw it in their face. Lean on reputable third-party sources to help with this. And don't just drop URLs and be like, "Oh, well, this does this." Just again, be tactful about it. Be nice. Be good to your classmates. Also, listen a lot. I'm definitely guilty of this, trying to talk over people or, trying to talk before people are done, speak before people are done talking. But, try your best to just, listen to people, hear what they have to say, then respond. Stay out of the gossip. I feel like it's probably a little less of an issue with all virtual classes, but I'm sure it's probably still happening. But even if you feel the same way about a particular person, take the high road, keep it to yourself. Again, being perceived as someone who participates in all that kind of negative behavior long term is not going to be good. Now, gossip is not the same as honest, well thought out criticism. That's fine. And again, as long as you're doing it with the best intentions in mind, that's important. Treat school like a workplace that's maybe just a bit more fun. It is okay to be ridiculous and joke around, even in the workplace. That kind of stuff is fine sometimes, but know when to turn it off and be serious and professional. Okay, so remember that whole diversity thing we talked about. In my experience, the program's had pretty decent racial diversity compared to, say, the average Silicon Valley startup. The Toronto tech scene in general is relatively decent this way. We do have serious issues with gender diversity. Now, we can't look around the room and see, but I'm going to bet that you probably don't have a ton of female classmates. Unfortunately, this sometimes has led to some less than awesome treatment of our female colleagues. So understanding that not everyone in the program is listening to this here, I would challenge you to call out sexist and other discriminatory behavior, set a good example for your peers who aren't here to listen to me yell at them and aren't going to bother watching the video. All right, guys, this is another uncomfortable slide for you. There's a much lower number of women in the program than men. Women have just as much right to be in the program as you. if a classmate rejects your romantic advances or seems horribly uncomfortable, apologize and leave them alone. And really awesome guy to follow on Twitter, Tinkasek, which I forgot to add to my list, but I will. There was a post not that long ago, a tweet last year that he said, you know, don't use things that you've learned to, you know, stalk women. It's not cool. Don't do it ever. It's gross, and yeah, you need to stop. I don't know if that thread is still there, but Caitlin Bowden, who's now recently been inducted as a member of the Cult of the Dead Cow, which is pretty dope. But she had a really awesome Twitter thread on how not to be a creep that you can check out. Hopefully it's still on thread or there. And thanks very much for listening, everybody. There's a picture of my dog, Jasper, being a dork. And yeah, if you have any questions, you know, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, Discord, anything like that. Questions, you know, career stuff. If you want to talk about vulnerability research, of course, too, please feel free to reach out.
Yep, awesome. Thank you, John. There's one question in the questions channel about Centrum asking, did you find that having such a high GPA paid off in getting you a job or your overall knowledge?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So especially for co-op and early career, when you don't have a lot of you know, relevant work experience. So, you know, yeah, I had some IT stuff, I had some development stuff, but people, you know, they were looking for specific experience to the industry. So, you know, if you don't have that, they need to look at something else that they feel is a reliable indicator of, are you going to be, you know, are you going to be hardworking? Are you, you know, how are you going to do at this job in this kind of an environment? And so, you know, work experience that isn't directly relevant isn't always helpful. And usually at that stage in your career, it's, you know, they're short bursts. You know, you may have 4 months here, 8 months here, maybe a year working retail or something like that, right? So a lot of these organizations are going to lean on that GPA if you've got it on your resume. Now, if your GPA is not that great, don't put it on your resume. Don't worry about it. You know, find other ways to talk about this, you know, what you know, and put it on your resume. But make sure, you know, you're putting your best self on your resume.
Yeah, it's definitely something I noticed with focusing on school and ISSessions. I have like really no side projects, and I've always like worried. I'm like, is this a bad thing?
I had zero. I literally had 0 side projects. So
Interesting.
like,
Okay.
If we were you know, in a computer science program, and you know, computer science often doesn't involve a lot of hands-on practical stuff, you know, you need to go and take that computer science knowledge and apply it to some sort of software project. Or if you're, you know, software engineering, you know, you need to go and actually build stuff. For us, this industry doesn't always lend itself to, you know, building a side project, right? Like the only stuff on my GitHub is just stuff that I've basically contributed like little tiny bug fixes to. I've basically never developed a single outright thing myself. I think it's completely unnecessary. But again, it's going to depend on the person. You know, if your GPA is maybe not that great, then yeah, maybe you want to bolster that with some little projects that you've come up with that you can post. So it's going to depend on the situation, but I would say don't ever think that you have to have side projects, you know, as you're getting into the industry.
Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, I actually had one, John, if that's okay, if you're not too busy.
Yep.
I know it's late.
Nope.
I wanted to know, in your experience, like starting out, do you think that going into interviews, you are going to get asked technical questions, or is it just going to be broad questions like, what are your skills? How would you handle this problem? Are they going to be asking like specific questions, whether that be like pertaining to Windows, Linux, stuff like that?
Yeah, so so why I say, you know, have a good breadth of knowledge, and when I say breadth of knowledge, I mean, you don't, if we're talking networking, you don't need to know every single field of, the TCP header, for example. You don't need to go to that level of depth. But, you should be aware of things like, okay, what's a three-way handshake? Or, how does a TCP connection start? Or, why is it possible to determine if a UDP port is open? So things like that. I consider those to be, more general questions. They're higher level. They're not super technical. But, inevitably we are in a technical industry, and, you should expect some level of technical questions, but you don't need to memorize every innate little detail. You kind of want the Cole's notes of, all these different concepts, whether it's networking or, vulnerabilities or, programming or that kind of stuff. So you want to have that sort of surface level knowledge, but you still have knowledge of those things.
Got you. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. One more question about the internships. For anything InfoSec, I would do 8 months. If you can at all avoid doing 2-4 months, because honestly, in so many of these roles, it's going to take you at least a couple months to really get up to speed, depending on the co-op. Obviously, sometimes it may be faster. The other thing is in, consulting co-op, for example, they don't know enough about you and enough about your abilities for the first couple months to be able to properly place you into anything interesting. They can't, if they're doing multi-million-dollar engagements for clients, they can't really risk putting this untested co-op student in charge of something important, right? So you have to kind of prove yourself early on. And for that reason, I think it's best to always go for the long co-op if at all possible. But, I think there's been situations where people just entered into a co-op situation that was awful, and out of necessity, got out after the, at the 4-month cutoff, and then went and did another thing for 4 months. So, the option's there, but I would say definitely prefer the 8 months. And yes, absolutely. So I would say probably the majority of people, they do. Sorry, I'll reread the question just in case for people on YouTube. The question is it possible to get a job through our internship? Yeah, absolutely. I would say the vast majority of people accept the position with their co-op employer if it's offered to them. And I would say the majority probably get an offer. But not everybody takes it. I mean, if you really, really hated it, but you stuck it out, then don't go back. But that's what I did. I mean, I went back with, I stayed with Deloitte. I worked part-time through my last 2 semesters. I went full-time for roughly a year, and then went to where I am now. All right. Anyone else?
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, everyone.
Thanks to everybody for coming. Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks Yusuf and Adam for hosting the news. And if anybody wants to stick around,
for making the great lab presentation.
If you guys want to know more about Home Labs, the article CK linked was awesome, and I quickly read through it during our break. I would recommend diving into that as well. But yeah, we're gonna stick around for 10 minutes if you guys want. We're gonna play some Jackbox after. Yeah, thanks everybody for coming.